Hi everyone, my name is Benjamin Nowak, and this is video number 1 in a 3-part series on fishing map terms that anglers need to know. Now this video is going to be really focused on the basic terms that anglers need to know. When you look at a fishing map, what are you looking at? What are ways that you can communicate and describe the features and contours that you're fishing and that you're looking at on your lake maps to be successful? There's a lot of times, especially as newer anglers, where people talk about fishing, they talk about patterns, and you might not understand all the terminology that they're using. So in this video, we're going to really dive into the basics to get you guys set up for success in parts 2 and 3, which are focused on intermediate terms and advanced terms, which will build off of the concepts that we talk about in this video. So if you guys enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button if you're not already, and share it with a friend who might need to know these fishing map terms. But without further ado, let's dive into this thing.
So let's start by looking at how to read contour lines, and this here is one of my favorite illustrations to help you understand how to read contour lines, and it's going to become critical as we start to dive into different areas on a map so you can identify these locations. But contour lines are essentially your lifeblood on a topo map. This is where it shows you different slopes, it shows you different shapes that you're going to be fishing, and it will help you identify the way the areas lay out to position yourself on a body of water to find fish. So by looking at this illustration, what you can see on the left here are the contour lines, and areas where those contour lines get closer together are steeper slopes. Where they start to spread out, those slopes are more gradual. They're slower tapering areas. And if you look at this first graphic here, you can start to see where those contour lines start to spread out a little bit. You have a slower, more gradual slope, as opposed to the right side of this area where those contour lines are closer together. The right side of this area tends to be a little steeper. Then you can see the second graphic is really just a basic hump with a high spot in the middle of it. Pretty generic or pretty typical average spread on those contour lines, which just creates a point. In the third one, you have basically two smaller humps, pretty evenly spread out, and you have two high spots, which are both basically in the middle of that area. And then again, just like that first demonstration, instead of having a high point on the right side, you have a high point on the left side. Those contour lines are closer together, more sloping as you spread out to the right. Same thing in visual 4, and then just like in visual 3, you have basically two high spots with a little saddle in the middle. But by understanding contour lines, you can really start to take a look at your lake map and understand and identify the way the area is set up. So it's really important as we dive into this video to be able to understand how to read contour lines. Those areas where those contour lines are closer together are steeper slopes. Where those contour lines start to spread out are slower, more tapering areas. And this is going to become critical as we dive in to the next couple of points here. So the term we're going to start with is points, and the reason we're starting with points is because they're very easy to locate on a lake map, but they're also easy to locate when you're actually out on your body of water fishing, because you can look at the bank and find areas where shallow water extends into deeper water and visualize that area setting up underwater. So we're going to show you guys what it looks like on a map, but it's basically a shallow water area where it extends into deeper water, and fish will relate to these areas all season long. Now, as we look at Dale Hollow Lake, which essentially has endless amounts of points, we're going to look at these areas where you have this piece of land that extends out into deeper water. And you can see here, okay, you have deeper water on the right-hand side, deeper water on the left-hand side, and you have this tapering point coming out, forming underwater on this topo map. Now, an example of a more defined point would be like right here, where you have this Phillips Island. You have a really steep breaking area with the contour lines a lot closer together, and a more tapering area where those contour lines start to spread apart, and this flat point coming out into deeper water. So points are really easy to identify when you're physically on the lake, and by looking at lake maps, you're looking for those triangular areas where shallow water extends towards deeper water. Now you're also going to hear people refer to, especially in the spring and the fall, main lake points and secondary points. points. What they mean by that, main lake points are areas where points will touch your main body of water. So if we look at Dale Hollow again, your main body of water is out here. A main lake point is the outermost point leading back up into a cut. So main lake point, main lake point. Your secondary points are these smaller points leading back up into this bay or cut or channel, whatever you may refer to it as. So main lake point is one touching the main lake. Secondary points are leading back up into these bays or cuts. And a lot of people will talk about these in the spring when they talk about locating pre-spawn and spawning fish, or in the fall when they talk about fish pushing to the back of the creeks to feed on bait fish. So main lake points are the ones out towards the main lake, touching the main lake or main creek channel. Secondary points are leading back up into these creeks or cuts or channels. Now, identifying a couple more points for you guys here. I mean, there's endless amounts of points on Dale Hollow Lake. You have your main lake point here, really obvious shallow water point coming off of this island. And then you have another point leading up into this creek. And then you have these secondary, more tapering, rounded points that lead up into this creek where fish will set up and stage. But points is basically the easiest area to locate on a map, and what I would consider a starting point for understanding the way that contour lines work. Those areas where those contour lines are closer together, really tight together, are steeper drop-offs, where they start to spread apart a little bit, are more tapering, slower contour changing areas. The second term that we're going to take a look at is humps. And what a hump is essentially a high spot, a rise, surrounded all three sides by deeper water. And a lot of people can also refer to these as submerged islands. And by looking at Houghton Lake again, here's an example of a hump. You have deeper water, and then you have these circular contour lines coming up to a shallower hump in the middle of your lake. So shallow water surrounded by deep water on all four sides. Again, another hump here, deeper water that rises up to a shallow water high spot on your body of water. Humps are also really easy to identify on a lake map, a great spot for fish to set up, especially during the summertime when they're looking for isolated areas to get on those high spots to come up and feed. Humps are pretty easy to identify, just like a point, because they typically stand out really effectively. You can see it really obviously. You look at your lake map, you see these circular contour lines, and you can pretty easily identify where these humps are, just like a point. So the next term that we're going to talk about are cuts or canals or creeks. And you heard me mention a little bit when we were looking at Dale Hollow Lake, but they're also very easy to identify on a lake map because they're these arms essentially coming off your body of water, areas where it's attached to the main lake and it tapers down into these offshoots, these cuts or creeks coming off of your main body of water. So we look at Wixom Lake here in Michigan. You have your main river channel, and then you have these cuts or arms coming off of your main body of water that form your creek or your canal or your little arm coming off of the main lake. And these are on pretty much all bodies of water for the most part, where you have these little cuts or canals or creeks coming into your lake. So super easy to identify, really productive areas to locate fish, especially when they're up trying to spawn or when they're pushing bait fish during the fall. These arms or cuts or creeks are really productive locations that you can break down a little bit more easily than the main lake to locate where fish might be living. Now, this is another example of a lake here in Michigan, Secord Lake, where you have a main river channel and then you have these arms or creeks coming in, which can hold fish throughout the year. So if someone mentions a cut or a creek or a canal, it's these arms or offshoots from your main body of water. So the next term that we're going to take a look at are flats. And when you start to identify flats on your body of water, it's areas relatively void of contour changes. We're going to take a look at Chickamauga Lake because it's mainly a river system known for a lot of flats where fish will set up. And what a flat is essentially an area typically referred to in shallow water or talked about with regards to shallow water flats, but it's an area void of a lot of contour changes. So you have your main river channel here in the center of Lake Chickamauga, and then you have this big shallow water flat extending into your lake. Okay, so your river channel here, and then you have this large shallow water flat where there's very few contour changes up on this shallow water zone. You have a lot of contour change right off of the river channel, and then you have this large shallow water flat, pretty much void of contour changes. You can look for this all around your body of water, all around your lake. Here's an example of another flat, your main river channel, and then you have a big flat coming off of it. A main river channel, and then you have, there's still some contour changes, but a pretty decent flat off of that river channel. Now, it's really exaggerated when you look at rivers because flats will stand out really effectively against the drasticness of what is the river channel. But if you come to a natural body of water, glacial style body of water, flats can be pretty much at all depths. And a lot of people talk about flats with regards to shallow water, but you can have deeper water flats as well. So here on Hubbard Lake in Michigan, look at this area here. This is a good example of a 6 to 8 foot flat where it's surrounded by deep water on one side, but you have this large area where there's relatively no contour lines. Here's another example of a medium depth flat. You have deep water, a lot of contour lines, but then you have this big, shallower water flat. Or for example, if fish start to push off of the break, and guys talk about them being on deep flats, you look here at the bottom part of the lake where you have all these hard contour lines, and then you have these more sloping, flatter areas, pretty much void of contour lines. So you can have deep water flats just as easily as you can shallow water flats, but a lot of guys, especially when you look down south, they talk about these flats with regards to shallow water. Up here in Michigan, when you're smallmouth fishing, especially in the winter and the spring, these fish will get on those deep water flats, those areas where fish can stage up in that deep water to winter. Now, if we look here at Lake Charlevoix, some less obvious deep water flats, you have these points coming out, and then deep water flat would be like where these contour lines start to spread out. So there's a lot of examples of what a flat might be. If you're fishing river channels, they stand out really, really obviously. If you're looking at your more natural style bodies of water, your flats could be a little bit less obvious. So for these final terms, we're going to come back to Chickamauga, and we're going to be talking about channels, channel swings, and channel swing banks. And this is really related a lot of times to river fishing or reservoirs, where you have a main river channel that cuts through your body of water, and channel swing banks is we're going to identify our areas where that channel or that river will turn and come up against shallow water. So looking at Chickamauga, this is a very zoomed out view, but you can really see the river channel, that deep water area that cuts through your body of water. So you can see here, this river channel that cuts through Lake Chickamauga, that is your channel. And your channel swings are these areas where this river channel starts to bend or turn. And a lot of people talk about channel swing banks with reference to ledges or bluffs or productive points where that channel swing comes up against a point. You can typically find fish positioned on that point because there's a lot of current that flows over that point, or with reference to flats, as we mentioned or talked about just in the earlier discussion. But you have your channel, then you have your channel swing, and then you have your channel swing bank, where that channel pushes up against either the bank, or a channel swing bank could be with reference to like the flat. Let me find an example of that. Like for here, for example, where this channel swing comes up against this flat at Harrison Bay. I don't know if this is a good area, but if I were fishing, you have this point right here where this channel swing comes out against this, and then you have this flat that starts to taper off. Probably be a good area to start looking for ledge fish, and then you have these smaller points coming out meeting this channel swing, and to me this just looks like a really productive location. Now if you come back up north, I mean, not everyone is fishing the Tennessee River. Let's go to some of our river fisheries, which I already showed you guys a little bit earlier, but Sanford Lake, unfortunately no longer there. You have your channel, main channel, then you have your channel swing bank, where that channel pushes up against this shoreline, or you have, this channel swing where this channel swings, comes around and forms this point. A lot of fish would stack up on the start where these contour lines start to spread apart and form this point because you have a lot of current blowing across that area. Or you have the channel where it pushes up and forms this flat, and fish will get on this flatter area as well. But it's on a much lesser scale, obviously, than Lake Chickamauga. Now here's an example of the St. Clair River, which comes off of Lake Huron flowing into Lake St. Clair. You have your main river channel, you have your channel swing where it comes up against this point and then pushes down into two separate areas. But you have examples of channels and channel swings pretty much anywhere that you have some sort of river or current flow system. If people start talking about points, you have these shallow water areas coming out towards deeper water. If people start talking about humps, it's areas of shallow water surrounded by deeper water zones, and this is a very micro point, a 3-foot rise surrounded by 6 to 9 foot of water. If you start talking about creeks or cuts, or canals, you have these canals or areas branching off of your main body of water. If people start talking about flats, they're talking about flatter zones or areas where there's less contours on your lake maps. And if people talk about channels or channel swing banks, your channel is the main river channel, the area where the current is flowing the hardest, the deeper water zone, and the channel swing is where that channel turns and comes up against some, contour change, whether it's a point, whether it's a flat, whether it's just the bank. It's these swings or turns in the channel or the river, that deeper water zone.
So if you guys enjoyed that video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Share it with your friends if you think that there's useful information that they could learn from as well. And stay tuned for intermediate and advanced term videos coming out very shortly. If you guys want to see more videos, click this button right here. If you're not already subscribed, hit my face right there. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. Take care, tight lines. God bless. Pursue your passion.